made you get that train? Why don't you have these trains? We get questions a lot about the decisions that I've made to get or avoid certain engines for our railroad here, the secondhand overland. And regardless of what scale you collect, there are seemingly endless options of trains that you can buy. Certain eras, certain manufacturers, certain road names, certain areas of the world where those trains are from. There's a ton of different options out there. And if you just bought everything that looked cool, you'd probably be broke in a week. Or at least I would be. Probably less than that. But regardless, I wanted to break down the reasons and criteria that we have for selecting the trains on our railroad. Now, I've gone over stuff before on how to buy trains, things to look for, new versus used, online auction sites, and going to, train shows and stuff like that. Or my friends at trains.com. I've made a ton of stuff that covers how to buy the trains. But I wanted to focus today on why we buy these trains and the criteria that they kind of need to fall into, because it's not quite as cut and dry as, well, it can clear your stupid 048 curves you're always talking about, Mike. Yeah, I know that they obviously need to be able to do that, but there's still stuff that I try and do that limits what we buy. Now, on the one hand, limiting yourself on the surface doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun, but honestly, it's actually been really fun, especially for me, researching this stuff and finding out things that I want to add and why that I wanted to share with you guys. When my son and I started this adventure in O-gauge trains, there was very clearly a focus on Union Pacific, much to the dismay of a lot of my East Coast fans. It's fine. It's what's here. We live in Omaha, Nebraska. I don't know if you missed that detail, but it's kind of hard not to run over train lines that are of Union Pacific origin. And it's cool tying in that local history. And that was something that I wanted to do very early on when we were getting into this. Not just as a way to limit what we were getting, but also as a way to focus our collection. So that way my son can learn about all this history and, transportation and how America was built and all that other fun stuff. So UP very easily right off the bat. But more specifically, I wanted to build our world around a certain era because of a certain train. And I can already hear the eyes rolling when I mention Big Boy, because as much popularity as the Big Boy has gained, for those that have been around the hobby for a while, they're probably getting a little bit tired of hearing about the Big Boy. But it's a big deal, and my 5-year-old son absolutely loves that train. So when I got one for our O-gauge railroad, I decided, hey, let's build a world around this train that would occupy the rails or maybe bring freight to and from or passengers going by. Let's try and find an era of trains that could complement and work around the Big Boy. And it's worked out pretty cool because that era of time where that train existed gives you a lot of neat options. 40s, 50s, and kind of getting into the edge of the 60s if you really want to stretch it. There's a lot of cool early diesel stuff. There's still a lot of older steam engines that were being used until they were phased out with dieselization. There's this neat kind of era that the Big Boy resides in that makes it really fun to collect. And I found out really early when we were focusing stuff mostly on Union Pacific that I was going to need to find a way to branch out, or things were going to look really black and yellow. All of UP's diesels are yellow, and all of their steam engines, with the exception of this beautiful guy over here, are black. So I'm like, we need to find a way to make our collection a little bit more interesting, to diversify things. So besides focusing on that era in time, I also wanted to focus just in general on, again, trains that would have come in passing with them. So we made this era and region specific. The Midwest going out to the coast, essentially, basically where UP operates today. We have a lot of heritage engines that didn't know it at the time that were going to be part of the Union Pacific. Talking about Southern Pacific, the Katy, Rio Grande. There's a bunch of cool railroads that have all this neat history themselves that could have occupied the rails around the same time that the Big Boy was around. And so that helped us branch out and get things like the Daylight, probably one of the most iconic and colorful steam locomotives that would have been around the same time that the big boy was around. So lots of neat stuff that allowed us to diversify and make things more interesting and just kind of open things up a bit more to be able to celebrate this era in trains, in railroading. So there's two criteria right off the bat. It needs to be in an era that the big boy would have been in, and it needs to be, operating in or around the Midwest, Western kind of regions and stuff. Pretty much everything on our side of the Mississippi. But there's a third criteria that has made things really interesting for collecting, and I've only broken this rule twice. It's kind of hard not to, being a UP fan, and not have multiples of the big boy and the Challenger, especially since both of those engines also have excellent examples in the Lionmaster lineup that, if you've been around my channel for any amount of time, you know that I love Lionmaster trains because they bring big steam to a railroad that otherwise wouldn't be able to enjoy those massive engines, thanks to the clever wizardry underneath the boilers that allows them to cheat and make their way around corners that they normally wouldn't be able to traverse. If we only had 072 down here, then yeah, we could have massive scale locomotives, but the Lionmaster line brings those bigger engines to our rails, and I'm going to be making another video covering the entire Lionmaster steam lineup and weighing in on that, so you want to stick around for that. Speaking of, while I'm thinking of it, since you're here, if you haven't already, please subscribe and hit the notifications bell, because that way you'll know when that video is coming out and the rest of the fun stuff that my son and I are working on here. But I want to get back to, again, that third criteria, and that's having a diverse lineup, meaning I don't want to have a ton of consolidations, a ton of 060s. I don't want to get multiples of certain types of engines, because I learned really early on, there was a time when I had 3 Challenger locomotives, and that was cool, but besides this Greyhound over here and my black 3985, which as a UP fan, you kind of have to have the Challenger in there. And the third one that I had was a green Rio Grande Challenger locomotive, and that was a great train. It was a great model to run, but I found myself instead getting a different green-bellied locomotive. I covered that in a Q&A session that I did earlier, but essentially I found out that having a bunch of Challengers wasn't quite as interesting to run. So instead I found a mogul, which is a type of wheel arrangement that we never had on the line. And it still had a green boiler, so it brought some color to the line. And it was from a railroad that wasn't Union Pacific. So it diversified things quite a bit more. It made things more interesting to run around here. That's just one example. I've gone out of my way, even with diesel locomotives, which kind of has bit me in the butt. This F3 back here that I got for my son's birthday in 2023, there's a ton of railroads that run F3s. And if I didn't have this one here, then I could have picked up, maybe a Missouri Pacific or a Daylight or something else with some cool color arrangement that isn't a yellow diesel, because all of UP's diesels look the same after a while. So it's neat bringing different things to the line. Recently added this Rock Island Fairbanks and Morse H15-44. I'm rusty on it because I'm still looking up info on this, but it's just a neat engine, and Rock Island has a station right across the river that my son and I like to visit to watch Iowa Interstate go in and out of the yard. It's really neat, again, tying in more local history. Sure, it's not part of UP's, heritage roster and stuff like that, but UP did actually consider purchasing the Rock Island lines for quite a while there. The history on that's a little interesting, but still need to have some Rock Island pieces now to the collection, while still keeping it era-specific and region-specific. And it was my first Fairbanks Morse locomotive, and those just have a cool design to them. Now, I have broken the rules a couple other times, but I can probably get into that in a separate video. But all you really need to know is, if you set yourself some criteria in order for engines to fit into whatever world you're trying to build, you do limit what you're getting. But in doing the research and digging into the history and figuring out what went with what and where they operate and all that stuff, that whole element of collecting can be a lot more fun. And it's not an element of fun that you have to pay for. And that, I don't know, it helps me get more out of this collection and enjoy this stuff a lot more with my son. Teaching him about them when we add these engines to the roster is also a really cool element for me. But yeah, if you guys have more questions about why we do or don't have certain engines on the line, if that didn't answer it for you, let me know down in the comments. As always, please like and subscribe again. Check out Trains if you want to use my discount code and all that fun stuff. And we'll see you guys on the next one.